Randy McNamara calls himself a mission realization coach. He states his own mission is to empower people, organizations, and governments to cause extraordinary results that ensure a thriving, livable planet. His 40 clients include globally respected economists, organizations working on reforestation in the Amazon, Africa, and Australia, a rainforest initiative being conducted by an arm of the United Nations, organizations cleaning up the ocean. He's a CEO of a lithium mining company. Industries working on breakthrough energy technologies, organizations working on government policies, a world-renowned photographer, and a former diplomat working on educating the high school students on the climate emergency. Prior to launching his mission realization consultancy for 45 years, he led weekend courses that empowered 300,000 people to think for themselves and create new futures for themselves, for their communities, and the world. In addition, he trained 800 leaders to coach citizens who carried out 100,000 community projects. Randy is the organizer of the Mission Realization Methodology, which is founded on the principle that our actions are correlated to the way in which the circumstances we are dealing with occur and show up for us, and to the way in which we occur and show up for ourselves when dealing with those circumstances. He asserts that we and life occur for us human beings in language. By discovering the language we are using to deal with a situation, we can set that language aside. We can then stand in our mission and invest new language with which we can alter the way we act. Today, Randy is having a conversation with us, which he entitles Waking Ourselves Up from the Trance About Global Warming and Climate Change. This is not a lecture. He provides us to think using questions and exercises from which we are invited to discover for ourselves the sources or the trance we are in. He issues an audacious invitation to us to create a new kind of time and a new way to relate to one another from which we can take immediate action. And finally, he declares that we human beings are the only species with the unique ability to end human contributions to global warming and climate change. We have the power to imagine and we have the power to promise.
What I've got to say is designed for all of us to wake up from the trance about global warming and climate change. This isn't a talk, this isn't a lecture, and it's not a debate. Today, I'm extending an invitation to you to go on a journey of discovery. I assert that we human beings are in a trance about global warming. What is a trance? A trance is a half-conscious state characterized by a lack of response to external stimuli. Let me tell you that again. A trance is a half-conscious state characterized by a lack of response to external stimuli. Consider this. The only way to wake yourself up from a trance is to discover for yourself that you're in one. If somebody explains to you that you're in a trance, you understand, but you won't wake up. To wake yourself up from a trance, you have to look into your own experience and discover for yourself. No one can force you to do that. Throughout this journey of discovery, I'll ask you to do a series of personal experiments. Very easy to do. All you have to do is raise your hand, or use a finger to point, or to imagine a few things. If you follow the instructions, I promise you will wake up from the trance. If you only think about following the instructions, but you don't follow them, I doubt very much that you'll get any value from the conversation. Let's go on the journey. Most of us human beings believe we have a mind. I assert that the mind is designed to agree or disagree with what someone else says. What thought do you have when I say the design of the mind is to agree or disagree with what someone else says? If you agree, please raise your hand. Thank you. If you disagree, please raise your hand. If you didn't raise your hand to agree or disagree, consider this. Not raising your hand is just your mind's way of disagreeing with my request to raise your hand. The controversy over global warming and climate change boils down to people agreeing or disagreeing with what other people think. Whether they agree that global warming is happening or not, whether human beings are contributing to it or not, what should we do about it, what shouldn't we do about it. I'm now going to make 5 statements. After each statement, I'll ask you to raise your hand to show that you either agree with the statement or disagree with the statement. To do this exercise, you do not have to publicly raise your hand, but it's way more powerful if you raise your hand. But it's enough if you just mentally notice your mind's response. Statement number 1, climate change is real and human activity is contributing to that change. If you agree with that statement, please raise your hand. Thank you. If you disagree with that statement, please raise your hand. Thank you. Statement number 2, there's something wrong with people who believe that climate change is real. If you agree with that statement, raise your hand. Thank you. If you disagree, please raise your hand. Thank you. Statement number 3, there's something wrong with people who deny climate change is real. If you agree with that statement, please raise your hand. If you disagree with that statement, please raise your hand. Last 2 statements. People in the fossil fuel industry only care about profits. If you agree, raise your hand. Thank you. If you disagree, raise your hand. Last question. A lot of people in the environmental movement are unrealistic zealots. If you agree, please raise your hand. Thank you. If you disagree, please raise your hand. I invite you to consider that no matter whether you agreed or disagreed with any of the 5 statements, most, if not all of your responses were automatic. You didn't have to think about how to respond. Your responses just popped up. That's the way the mind works. However, I invite you to consider the possibility that you are not your mind. It is as if you have a second mind that's separate from your mind. And this second mind can observe your thoughts from a very detached vantage point. You have the ability to recognize your thoughts and set them aside. Discovering that you're able to recognize your thoughts and set them aside is the beginning of waking up from the trance about global warming and climate change. The second step in waking ourselves up from the trance about global warming and climate change is to discover for yourself how the mind limits the way you see yourself and every other person. To get this insight, again, you have to follow the instructions. Please take your index finger, and without figuring it out, point to where you are. Thank you. Now, using your index finger, without figuring anything out, point to where I am, or where you see me if you're watching video. You've just discovered our fundamental relationship to one another. We live as if the only way to relate to other people is that you are here and they are there. This trance leaves humanity living as if this is a you or me world. This trance results in individuals, corporations, and nations looking out for themselves at the expense of other people when searching for solutions to the threat of global warming and climate change. In some cases, we even end up ignoring the suffering of millions of other people. But all of us have heard of catastrophes in which people who don't know each other, have different backgrounds, different religious beliefs, different political beliefs, in an instant jump into action to save strangers buried in the rubble from an earthquake or a collapsed building, or spend day after day after day working with each other to save strangers who are stranded in a flood. I assert that the fact that people do this demonstrates to you and me that this is a you, not a you or me world. This is not a you or me world. That's merely a possible view of life. It's not the only way we can view life. It demonstrates to us that we human beings have the power to set aside the thought that is a you or me world, and we can work together in a me and you world. I'll say it again, a me and you world. Now, it's become popular with some groups to use the term you and me. I've chosen to disrupt this popular use to point out that even in a you and me world, we start thinking me and you. It's just natural. Me and you, even though English, it doesn't sound proper. Look at this picture of the Earth from space that was taken in 1972. This picture upended our view of ourselves and the planet forever. For most of us, the moment we saw it, the Earth stopped being a colorful globe with boundary lines and nations' names sitting on a desk in a teacher's schoolroom to being this brilliant, vibrant, boundary-free planet Earth. It became our planetary home. I invite you to look at this picture and wake yourself up from the trance of a you or me world, and from this point forward, for the entire rest of your life, see this planet as a me and you world. The most critical step to waking up from the trance about global warming and climate change is to discover the trance we're in with regard to time. Before we can do that, we need to discover that the way you and I think and act is determined by something I call the unsaid. Here's a thought experiment so you can discover the unsaid. Imagine I say to you, get me some water, please. Without figuring anything out, you'd get up from wherever you are, you'd go get a clean glass, you'd put clean water in it, and you'd bring it and you'd put it in my hand now. But all I said was, get me some water, please. Getting a clean glass, putting clean water in it, and handing it into my hand now, all that lives in the unsaid. You wouldn't have to think about it, you just do it. Much of what you and I do in our daily life lives in the unsaid. Now I'm going to invite you to do a personal experiment to discover the way time exists in the mind. I remind you again, in order to free yourself from a trance, you have to do the experiment, not think about doing it. When I say time, I assert what lives in the unsaid is past, present, and future. Just like if I asked you to get me some water, please, without figuring anything out, you'd get a clean glass and clean water and put it in my hand now. When I say time, I assert that what lives in the unsaid is past, present, and future. Just like when I asked you to get me some water, please, without figuring anything out, you'd get a clean glass with clean water and hand it to me right now. When I say time, without figuring anything out, what lives in the unsaid for you and me is time is composed of the past, the present, and the future. You and I don't think about that. That's what lives in the unsaid of our thinking. However, don't just take my word for it. Let's do an experiment and check it out for yourself. Please take your index finger and, without figuring anything out, point to where the past is. Now take your index finger and point to where the future is. Now take your index finger and point to where the present is. For most of you, when I say point your finger to where the past is, you go like that. And for most of you, when I ask you where the future is, you point like that. And when I ask you where the present is, you point this. Remember what a trance is. A trance is a half-conscious state characterized by a lack of response to external stimuli. I assert that you and I live in an illusion. We live as if the future is out there in front of us. Not now, later. But if you actually examined your personal experience in this moment, you realize there is no future out there, not now, that will happen later. That's an illusion. Using your mind, you can remember a past, but you can't go back there. Using your mind, you can imagine a future, but you can't be there. The only place you and I can ever be is right here, right now. What you and I call the future, when we actually get to what we call the future, it will be right here, right now. I invite you to set aside the thought that the future is not now, out there, later. Okay, so you're asking yourself, what's the point? Here's the point. Instead of facing reality and going to work on dealing with global warming and climate change now, some of us, including critical corporate, government, non-governmental organization, and think tank leaders, are arguing about which imagined future is the right imagined future and which imagined future is the wrong imagined future. We debate about which computer model reliably predicts what the future will look like so we can decide the right thing to do or not do in response to these various invented predictions. Meanwhile, the forces of global warming and climate change are happening moment by moment by moment by moment by moment. The planet does not care what you and I think. The planet does not care about what you and I feel. And the planet does not care what you and I believe. I'm going to show you a series of images of what things looked like in the past compared to what they looked like more recently. Again, a trance, a half-conscious state characterized by a lack of response to external stimuli. In a trance, the mind can dismiss images of global warming and climate change as just pictures or things that are happening to other people, not me. Day after day, the news is filled with pictures like the ones I'm going to show you. I assert that the mind tends to go numb to these pictures in the same way that you and I go numb to the endless avalanche of advertisements that we see on television, on the internet. But we really go numb to experiencing that these events are happening to real people in their real lives, and these kinds of things could be happening to me and you very, very soon. So here's the first picture. There continues to be a rapid reduction of the ice in the Arctic. Ice is white. Snow-covered ice is white. It reflects the sun rays back into the space, which then keeps the atmosphere at a normal temperature. When the ice melts, look at this next slide, there's less ice, so the sea is black. Black absorbs the heat. The ocean gets warmer, and as the ocean gets warmer, it expands. The polar ice caps are melting. The expanding seas and melting ice are causing sea levels that are threatening coastlines around the world and island nations. I'm going to show you two pictures of Hoover Dam. Hoover Dam blocks the Colorado River. It is a major producer of electricity. Here it is. Now look at the water level. The Colorado River is so low it threatens the production of electricity and actually the carrying on of farming in California, the Southwest, and Mexico. Warming oceans and increased acidification are destroying the world's coral reefs. 50% of the world's coral reefs have either died or are severely damaged. The fish from these coral reefs feeds 500 million people. Glaciers around the world have survived for millennia. We are losing 267 gigatons of ice a year. Major rivers around the world are slowly drying up. Here's a picture of tropical forests. Forests like these have been called the lungs of the earth because they absorb carbon dioxide and they expel oxygen. But they're being destroyed every day to make way for farming, ranching, and palm oil plantations. Forest fires like this have devastated California, the Pacific Northwest, and Australia. Here's a picture of Auckland, New Zealand on a sunny day. In February of 2023, Auckland suffered what insurers called the biggest climate event in New Zealand history. This is what it looked like. Here are before and after pictures of recent Florida hurricanes. The upper pictures are before the hurricanes, the lower pictures are afterward. Rising seas are exacerbating the damage. Recently, 75% of the country of Bangladesh was flooded. Here are the faces of some of the tens of millions of people who suffered. And finally, here's Houston before and after recent floods. One of the most damaging trances of all the trances that keep us from taking effective action on global warming and climate change is the thought, it won't happen to me. This thought leaves us thinking we don't have to do anything yet, or worse, hoping that someone else will figure out what to do later on. I invite you to set aside the thought, it won't happen to me. So far, you've discovered, or perhaps rediscovered, that you have the power to see your thoughts and set them aside. Think about the images you've just seen. There are thousands more just like these happening every single day. You don't need a fossil fuel proponent, an environmental activist, a brilliant scientist, or a high-powered computer model to debate with you what the future will or won't look like. All you need to do is wake up, be conscious, and open your eyes. I propose that humanity needs a new kind of time. I'm inviting you to imagine a new kind of time. That time is the future now. The future now is like an artist's blank canvas. There's nothing there right now. We are free to imagine the future now and act on it now. In this new kind of time, it is the actions we invent and take right now that determine the way in which our future in reality turns out. The future you invent and act on now can be informed by the past, but you are no longer constrained by how it was in the past. If nothing we talked about so far has woken you up from these trances, consider this. I'll ask you to imagine you walk out of the room you're in and you go outside. Imagine you look up at a clear blue sky. To your naked eyes, it will look like the sky never ends. But the breathable air is only 5 to 7 miles thick. It's thinner than the skin of an apple compared with the diameter of the earth, and there it is in this thin, bluish, whitish line. You and I, and all forms of life on this planet, are living in a limited, finite, atmospheric jar that we cannot see with our naked eyes. Look, there was a time not so long ago in which smoking was accepted, even fashionable and sophisticated. In that era, smart people just like you and me smoked and coughed their way through life. Many of us died of lung cancer. In the trance of that era, was hidden behind what everyone treated as normal behavior. Even watching other smokers die, we didn't wake up from the trance. It took almost 50 years of scientific evidence for us to come to the ridiculously obvious conclusion that sucking on a piece of burning tobacco and filling our lungs with smoke and tar isn't good for us. If you went on this journey of discovery, you've discovered your ability to set your thoughts aside. You're no longer in a half-conscious state. You are now conscious. Imagine this as you and your family in this limited, finite atmospheric jar. This jar contains a limited, finite amount of breathable air. I'm asking you, use your imagination and see yourself, your family, your children, your grandchildren, and every human being yet to come, all in this limited jar. Now I ask you, is it logical to continue doing what we've been doing to our atmosphere, hoping nothing happens to us, or that someone else will solve the problem later? Massive scientific evidence that this makes no sense has been building at least since 1988, while we as a species have kept right on living our lives in a trance. Unless you've gone numb and tuned me out the entire time, I assert that you and I can't consciously keep on pouring more and more pollutants into this limited, finite atmospheric jar in which we live. I assert that you and I can't consciously continue to lie to one another, that we can take limited actions and somehow control the damage being done by human contributions to global warming. We can't consciously continue pretending that we aren't destroying the future quality of life for humanity and every other form of life. You and I are now conscious. We don't need someone else to tell us that we're destroying our planetary home any more than a smoker in a cancer ward taking a cigarette, his last cigarette, and smoking it through a hole in his trachea needs someone to tell him he's killing himself. Here's the bottom line. All it takes to wake up from the trance we've been in about the danger of human contribution to global warming is common sense. Now, that all sounds like bad news. Here's the good news. I assert that we have the power to eliminate, not just cut back, not just mitigate, eliminate human contributions to global warming and climate change. You and I have forgotten that human beings have created miracles, millions of miracles. I'm going to take you through a little journey just in the last about 100 years, a 20-second sample of what human beings have created. We've gone from a primitive wooden oil well to an offshore drilling platform that can drill oil down from 2,000 feet below the surface of the sea. We've gone from a flimsy piece of wooden canvas that flew 12 seconds and flew less than 120 feet to today's jetliners that can fly a quarter of the way around the world at nearly 600 miles an hour. We've gone from a 42 mile per hour Ford Model T to an electric Tesla that can go 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds and go top speed of 155 miles an hour. We've gone from an old-fashioned Dutch windmill grinding grain to today's largest wind turbines that can produce 12 megawatts of electricity, enough to serve 16,000 homes. from a 1947 computer that filled an entire room to a computer that's more powerful than that, that can sit on your desk. From a low-profile New York in 1923 to a forest of high-rise buildings today. Finally, and the most audacious accomplishment in the history of humanity, walking on the moon 251,000 miles from Earth. When we set out to make these and the millions of other miracles we human beings have created, we didn't know how to do it. We discovered how to do it by taking action. Looking back at these accomplishments and letting yourself embrace the accomplishments that we've made that we haven't even put out there, I refuse to think that a species that's capable of going from that Wright brothers plane to walking on the moon in a little over 100 years can't eliminate human contributions to global warming and climate change. We human beings have two abilities that no other species have. We have the power to imagine. We have the power to promise. Imagine. Imagine this is a me and you world. Imagine me and you invent the future now. Imagine me and you take action now to realize that future. Imagine we are the crew of Spaceship Earth. And finally and critically, imagine we promise one another that we will do everything in our power to stop human contributions to global warming and climate change, and we promise failure is not an option.
Every